nap in the middle of it.
Open the statement.
Let's see. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back for our second day of hearing on Ms. Bondi's nomination for Attorney General. As I said yesterday, I want everyone to be able to watch the hearing without obstruction. If people stand up and block the views of others behind them, or if they speak out of turn, it's not fair or considerate to others, so officers will remove individuals as they have previously. We didn't have any of these problems yesterday. I don't anticipate it today, but I just think we ought to make everything pretty clear. Before we begin with opening statements from the panel, I want to go through a couple of bookkeeping items and explain how we're going to proceed today. I will give an opening statement and introduce the majority witnesses, and I'll give the opportunity to Senator Durban to provide an opening statement and introduce his witnesses. Then we will turn to our witnesses for their opening statements. Following their statements, we will begin with the first round of questions in which each senator will have 5 minutes. Yesterday, we met from 9:30 until 3 p.m. so that every senator, both Democrat and Republican, could question Ms. Bondi. We heard from Senator Scott and Schmidt, who gave their strong endorsement of Ms. Bondi. Their introductions described her extensive experience, outstanding qualifications, and character. Yesterday's testimony showed that Ms. Bondi is certainly experienced and capable to serve as our nation's chief law enforcement officer at this very critical time. She is very well qualified for the position, serving 18 years as prosecutor and 8 years as Attorney General for the state of Florida. Florida, the third most populous state in our nation. She will enact desperately needed changes at a department that has been politicized and weaponized for partisan ends. With almost 30 years of experience behind her, she will restore both morale and law and order to the department badly needed, in need of strong leadership. Her commitment to the rule of law emerged as a central theme of our discussion yesterday, and as I made clear in my opening statement yesterday, that is what I believe the department this country desperately needs. Today, the purpose is to hear from an outside panel of witnesses, and we're grateful that all of you are here this morning to express your views on this nominee. I will go ahead and introduce the 3 majority witnesses before I turn over to Ranking Member Durban. First is Dave Ehrenberg. Until just a few days ago, Mr. Ehrenberg was the elected Democrat state attorney for Florida's 15th Judicial District. He served in that role for 3 terms since he was elected in 2012. Mr. Ehrenberg also previously served in the Florida State Senate and as a White House fellow in both Clinton and Bush administrations at the Treasury Department. He has known Ms. Bondi since 2010 when he ran to be the Attorney General of Florida, a position Ms. Bondi obviously won. Notwithstanding their political differences, Ms. Bondi appointed Mr. Ehrenberg to be her drug czar to combat the opioid epidemic, and through that work, he came to know Ms. Bondi very well. Second, we have Mr. Nicholas Cox, who is Florida's longest-serving statewide prosecutor. He has served in that role since 2011. In his capacity as statewide prosecutor, Mr. Cox focuses on cases involving human trafficking, drug abuse, fraud, organized crime, gang violence, cyber crimes, and crimes against seniors. Mr. Cox also previously served a member of the faculty of Stetson University College of Law, where he taught trial advocacy, consumer law, counseling and negotiations, and criminal procedure. Mr. Cox has extensively experienced observing Ms. Bondi's work as a lawyer and administrator. Ms. Bondi began her career as an intern in his office while serving as Attorney General. She pointed him to his current office. Third and last, we have Sheriff Emery Gainey, a career law enforcement officer with more than 40 years' experience. Sheriff Gainey has served as a sheriff of 2 counties in Florida. When Ms. Bondi served as Attorney General, he served as her Director of Law Enforcement and Director of Victim Services. Through his work as law enforcement officer in Florida, Sheriff Gainey is very familiar with Mrs. Bondi's work with state, local, and federal law enforcement, as well as her work to address drug abuse, fight human trafficking, and victims of crime. Thanks, all of you, for serving. Senator Durban.
Thanks, Chairman Grassley. I want to take a moment to reflect on yesterday's session with Ms. Bondi. There seemed to be a meeting of minds on criminal justice reform and the pressing need to protect our children online. Those are good things. There are still some outstanding issues from yesterday's hearing that I'm struggling with. Let's start with a very important issue. Who won the election in 2020? Why are we still asking that question? For goodness sakes, we moved on to a new election. You would think that'd be over. The reason why that's still a relevant question is it gets to the heart of our democracy. The peaceful transition from one president to a new president by the will of the people without resistance and without denial. Does the phrase hanging Chad have any significance to our witnesses? It does to me and to every American. In the year 2000, Bush versus Gore, there was a contest that went on into December and numerous court contests associated with it as to who actually won that election. There came a moment when Al Gore stood up and said, that's it, it's over. I've gone to court, I can keep going to court, but I don't think that's in the best interest of this country. I concede, George W. Bush won. You didn't hear Democrats at that saying, never say that in public. Never concede that in public. He did. George W. Bush won the election because Al Gore decided to step out at a point when Bush was ahead, period. End of story. That is what a democracy is all about. One person concedes, the other person wins. We move to the next president and ultimately the next election. But that's not the case in the year 2020. We still have a candidate, in this case, President Trump, who's in denial as to what happened in 2020. And as a consequence, some characterize it a big lie, whatever you want to characterize it. It really is an important question because it gets to the fundamentals of anyone seeking a position in the cabinet of this president or serving our nation. Do they acknowledge the peaceful transition of power in 2020 from Donald Trump to Joe Biden? The answer is yes. The reason is we had the certification of the electoral vote. Senator Klobuchar remembers that well. And we went through the process we're supposed to go through in our Constitution. End of story. But yet when I asked that simple question of Ms. Bondi yesterday, she was unable to say just expressly yes. Joe Biden received more votes than Donald Trump and was elected president in 2020. Why is that such a hard question? I don't understand. Why couldn't she state plainly that that's what happened? When a nominee for Attorney General is afraid to state a simple fact, then what does it say about the future of our democracy and the credibility of our system of justice? She not only refused to acknowledge President Trump's defeat in 2020, she also said, quote, there was a peaceful transition of power. Let me repeat that, a peaceful transition of power. Seen the videotapes? What happened here on January 6th? Can you imagine if the news came on and said, did you hear what happened in London today? A mob stormed the Houses of Parliament, crashed through the door of the House of Commons, took control of British Parliament, and we hope that the police can take control back in a matter of hours so they can continue their business. What would we say to that? In London, in England, they went through what? A mob storming the Houses of Parliament, knocking down the door? Incredible. Whatever happened to that country? We thought they were leaders in the world. Now reflect for a moment on January 6, 2021, and what we went through. All of us went through individually, being spirited out of the Capitol building, taken to a safe place because of a mob. That was not a peaceful transition of power. And I want to just say, Sheriff Gainey, thank you for joining us today. You may have noticed, we all noticed around here, we're not supposed to notice, we should, the men and women in uniform who protect us in this chamber and throughout these buildings day in and day out. God bless them. But what they went through on January 6th is an outrage. Attacks on them, several lost their lives as a consequence of what they went through. Many were forced into retirement, and hundreds of people were arrested for trespassing and much more serious crimes. Donald Trump characterizes them as political prisoners. The people who attacked our policemen are characterized as political prisoners, and he promises that he's going to give a pardon to all of them on the day that he's sworn into office. I asked a basic question of Ms. Bondi as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, which she would be under as Attorney General. What do you think about the pardons? She wouldn't comment. Well, she made it clear she stood behind the police, but you can make them clear by saying to Donald Trump, this is a bad idea. Anyone who is guilty of violence, certainly guilty of violence, should not be pardoned on the day that you're sworn in as president. So I was at least disappointed by her answer. And then this Kash Patel issue. Kash Patel, I'm going to meet him next week for the first time. I've read an awful lot about him. There's an awful lot to read. He has a lot to say, and he said it, and he's published it in book form. One of the things he said is that he has an enemies list. Secret police agencies throughout history have an enemy list. The American FBI does not and should not. I think there's serious questions about this man, his judgment, and his political values that he would bring to office. Yesterday, Ms. Bondi embraced him as a person's right for the job. I certainly don't feel that way. He's going to have to convince me. So there are questions raised. Having said that, I want to concede two things. First, if I were setting out to hire an attorney, she certainly has the strongest resume and should be hired. Number two, the testimony today, particularly from people of the opposite political party in Florida, is a testimony to the fact that she's been bipartisan and very effective as Attorney General. I will concede that point. When she talks about the things she achieved, I'm impressed. I should be. But the question is, when Donald Trump knocks on her door as Attorney General, and he will, if you question that, ask Jeff Sessions or ask Bill Barr, he will knock on her door and ask her to do something that's going to be a challenge ethically or morally. It's just his nature. He views that office as an office he personally controls. He doesn't. The American people and the Constitution control that office, and we have to resolve whether or not Ms. Bondi is a person to be the next Attorney General. Our first minority witness is Lisa Gilbert, co-president of Public Citizen, a nonprofit organization with more than 500,000 members. The organization has an extensive record of investigating conflicts of interest in public corruption, and Ms. Gilbert will speak to the dangers of confirming someone with corporate interest as Attorney General. Second witness, Mary McCord, Executive Director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection. She's a visiting professor at the prestigious Georgetown Law Center. Prior to these roles, Ms. McCord served for nearly 20 years as Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, also served as Assistant Attorney General for National Security from 2016 to 2017, and Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General from 2014 to 2016. Mr. Chairman, at this point, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. You know, we have this tradition of swearing people in regardless of how honest you are and everything like that, so please rise. Would you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I've seen all of you say yes to that. Thank you very much. And now you may proceed with your statements, and we'll start with Mr. Ehrenberg and just go across the table that way. So please start out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Durban, Senators. In 2010, after serving 8 years as a state senator in Florida, I ran for Florida Attorney General. I faced a fellow state senator in the Democratic primary and one of 3 Republican candidates in a potential general election. Pam Bondi was one of those 3 candidates. This was her first run for political office, and she was the only candidate in the race on either side whom I did not know. At our first candidates forum, she came up to me with a big smile and told me her younger brother, who may be here today, Brad, worked with me at my old law firm as a summer associate and had very complimentary things to say. That was vintage Pam Bondi. My potential future opponent immediately disarmed me by ignoring partisanship to reach out to me as a human being. Pam won her primary, and I lost mine. I then endorsed my Democratic primary, who faced her in the general election, and then Pam won that election too. Despite the fact that I was on the other side of the aisle and did not support her campaign, Pam called me to offer the position as her drug czar to combat the opioid epidemic that was ravaging Florida and to shut down the state's ubiquitous pill mills that fed the nation's addiction. She offered me this position because she knew from the campaign that fighting the opioid epidemic had been my career priority and an important part of my campaign platform. It did not matter that I had a D after my name. She believed I was the best person for the job, regardless of party affiliation. I accepted the position and received a little pushback from my side of the aisle, but nothing compared to what Pam Bondi received. At a party event, one county Republican chairman was so angry that he wagged a finger in front of her face to condemn her decision. He didn't argue that I was unqualified, just that she was resurrecting a Democrat's political career who had just lost badly in a statewide election. On that, he may have had a point. I served as drug czar, though, for 2 years and then got elected as a Democratic state attorney for the next 3 terms, 12 years until last week. But you don't wag a finger in Pam Bondi's face and get away with it. Pam's kind and genuine and loves people, but she's also tough as nails. Pam met this guy's fire with fire, putting her own finger in the party leader's face to defend her new employee, and she didn't care that I was a Democrat or that she didn't know me that well at the time, or that one day this could help me run for office, which it did. She didn't do it because she one day hoped I would have her back at a Senate confirmation hearing. It was just the person she was and still is. When A.G. Bondi and I began our anti-pill mill initiative, 7 people a day were dying from prescription opioid overdoses, and there were more pain clinics in Florida than McDonald's in Florida. A year later, she convinced a reluctant Republican legislature to pass crucial, long overdue reforms, including a prescription drug monitoring program that dramatically reduced doctor shopping. A.G. Bondi used her bully pulpit and her bipartisan relationships to get it done. Today, Florida's pill mills are no more. The steady stream of cars from Appalachia that constituted the OxyContin Express are a distant memory, and countless lives have been saved because of our state's days as the drug dealer for the rest of the country is an ignominious part of our past. Pam Bondi and I have always had our political differences, although that has never come between our friendship. I supported the presidential campaigns of Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris. I've been outspoken on cable TV and streaming channels on a host of legal issues, including with Professor McCord, including the dangers of targeting one's political enemies. I was critical of the Durban investigation, which led to questionable criminal cases and embarrassing acquittals. A prosecutor's job is to follow the evidence and the law without fear or favor. Pam Bondi is a 20-year prosecutor who understands this. Even if she does something as Attorney General of the United States that I disagree with, I believe she will always remain tethered to the law. And there are some important issues where she and I are in complete agreement, such as the need to stop the flow of deadly fentanyl that has become by far the largest killer within the ongoing opioid epidemic. We agree on tough punishments for those who engage in the modern-day slavery known as human trafficking, and for laws that allow victims to have their low-level crimes expunged and to utilize the T-visa program when needed. We agree on the need for treatment courts, which have proven to be a better alternative to incarceration with a lower recidivism rate for many nonviolent drug offenders. And we agree there should be a stronger response to the growing number of anti-Semitic incidents in our country, and especially on college campuses. Senators, I'm grateful for the time to speak with you today and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Chair Grassley, Ranking Member Durban, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Lisa Gilbert, co-president of Public Citizen. Public Citizen is a 54-year-old nonprofit organization with 500,000 members and supporters across the country. We champion the public interest in the halls of power, working to ensure that our government and economy work for the people, not for wealthy special interests and corporations. On behalf of our members, we stand in opposition to the nomination of Pam Bondi for the role of Attorney General. The mission of the Department of Justice is to work on behalf of the American people, keep our country safe, protect civil rights, uphold the rule of law. Unfortunately, Pam Bondi has numerous troubling potential conflicts of interest from her time as a lobbyist, which call into question her ability to hold corporate wrongdoers accountable. I'll focus my testimony on our concerns about this problem. Public Citizen recently examined the federal lobbying disclosures and Foreign Agents Registration Act reports filed by Bondi and Ballard Partners, her lobbying firm. Our review showed that her client list is full of controversial clients, some of which stand to benefit directly from having their former lobbyist in charge of the DOJ. Over the last 5 years, she represented 30 clients, from large corporations and contractors to a foreign government. In addition, during her earlier time as Florida Attorney General, a recent New York Times review found several pieces of evidence that seemed to demonstrate her general tendency to assist corporate allies and corporate lobbyists' strong belief that Bondi was exceptionally accessible to lobbyists and amenable to the agendas of their corporate clients. Bondi had a large number of domestic clients, but today I'll highlight just two. Geo Group, the nation's largest private prisons company, and Amazon, an e-commerce giant. Bondi was registered to lobby the first Trump White House in 2019 for Geo Group. Both DOJ and DHS inspectors general have been critical of prison management of Geo Group, and they stand to profit substantially if the Trump administration's new immigration detention and deportation policies result in filling empty or underutilized beds in their facilities. As a real precedent for this concern, Public Citizen did research back in 2019, which showed Geo Group's contract dollars rose by over 40% in the first 2 years of the Trump term. Now to Amazon. They're, of course, a very well-known tech company. Bondi was registered to lobby for them in 2020. In recent years, they've been investigated by the DOJ over injury rates and workplace safety at their warehouses, been referred to the DOJ by a bipartisan group of lawmakers for potential criminal obstruction, and had their robo-taxi unit federally investigated over safety concerns. In addition, DOJ and the FTC recently reached a settlement with Amazon regarding children's privacy violations via Alexa. And of course, Amazon also receives multi-billion-dollar contracts from multiple federal agencies, ranging from DoD to NASA. Beyond these examples of potential domestic entanglements, Bondi was registered as a foreign agent, lobbying on behalf of foreign governments and officials. To highlight just two, Bondi worked for both the Embassy of Qatar and a Kuwaiti investment firm. For Qatar, the goal was the improvement of their often criticized human rights record before the 2022 World Cup. For the Kuwaiti investment firm, the work was an attempt to free a Russian money manager arrested in Kuwait on terms of embezzlement from her and her staff to the tune of tens of millions of government funds. So, to conclude, we believe a person with this deep record of controversial business and foreign government lobbying should not be considered for Attorney General. A well-functioning DOJ needs to be tough on corporate crime and work to improve the lives of our communities. This level of corporate entanglement just speaks to exactly the wrong incentives. During the first Trump term, corporate enforcement plummeted at the DOJ, and we really fear a repeat of this pattern. Public Citizen, to that end, recently created a tracker of ongoing federal investigations that are at risk of being dropped or weakened or modified. The tracker includes 237 investigations, which has cases against 192 distinct companies. Shockingly, nearly 1/3 of those companies have known ties to the incoming Trump administration. And as highlighted throughout my testimony, Pam Bondi is no exception. To be clear, we do not think that this level of corporate alignment can be addressed simply by recusals. Bondi's broad representation of and lobby registration for corporate interests is much more than a list of potential conflicts. It instead represents an overall sense of prioritization. It's a net of potential conflicts that there really isn't a realistic escape from. If her nomination as Attorney General proceeds, we are really concerned that she will take actions that reflect the needs of these types of entities. So with that, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the views of Public Citizen and welcome any questions.
Good morning, Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durban, and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify before you today on behalf of United States Attorney General nominee Pamela J. Bondi. My name is Emery Gainey. I am a 40-year career law enforcement officer who has served at all levels of law enforcement, to include the sheriff of 2 Florida counties. It has been my distinct pleasure and honor of knowing and working with Ms. Bondi since 2010. As a member of her senior executive staff, I served as the Director of Law Enforcement, Victim Services, and Criminal Justice Programs when she assumed the office of Attorney General in 2011. And I continued to serve in those capacities through her 8-year tenure as Attorney General. To this day, we maintain a very close professional, personal, and family relationship. I want to speak this morning on Ms. Bondi's commitment to the just and proper enforcement of the law, demonstrated through her well-earned relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement partners throughout the United States. During her service as a prosecutor in Florida's 13th Judicial Circuit, Ms. Bondi had well-established, deep-rooted relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. Upon becoming Attorney General, she immediately began the process of meeting all law enforcement leaders throughout the state of Florida to establish partnerships to ensure that our citizens and visitors to our state receive the most effective law enforcement and victim services available. One critical issue that she immediately took on was the emerging proliferation of deadly designer drugs, specifically those referred to as bath salts, that our state had been facing prior to her being elected as Attorney General. Ms. Bondi called together our stakeholders to include prosecutors, law enforcement, our Office of Drug Control, our state lab directors, and many others, to not only seek to understand this new trend in our state, but to seek immediate solutions to stop the spread of these deadly substances that were taking the lives of our citizens. From these stakeholder meetings, she developed a strategy and a call to action to immediately outlaw these dangerous bath salt substances. Utilized in Florida's rule-making statutes and bipartisan support from Florida's legislature, she was able to permanently ban the sale of these deadly drugs, despite the continuous efforts by those who altered their formulas in order to circumvent Florida law in an attempt to keep multiple versions of these harmful substances on some of the shelves of some of our retailers. These actions, in conjunction with our public and private partners, begin to effectively address a growing trend in illegal substance abuse in our state. Ms. Bondi's commitment to the rule of law was also evident in her taking the lead role investigating and prosecuting crimes involving gang activities, organized retail theft, human trafficking, and a host of other criminal activities. She demonstrated her deep commitment to keep and restore the lives of victims of human trafficking through her leadership on Florida's statewide Council on Human Trafficking by investing in and supporting safe houses for victims. She also partnered with multiple private businesses to help combat human trafficking in both the sex and label industries by establishing a zero-tolerance toolkit to train their staff in identifying and reporting suspected cases of human trafficking. I want to now focus on her compassionate side of her tenure, where she was and remains a staunch supporter of crime victims and crime victim rights. One of her roles as Florida's Attorney General was the delivery of crime victim services. The Florida Attorney General's Office was the recipient of and administered the third largest annual award of federal crime victim compensation funds, in addition to the state of Florida crime victim funds. Ms. Bondi dedicated a team of experienced victim advocates and crime compensation professionals to work with our local governmental and non-governmental agencies to ensure crime victims receive all the benefits allowable in the state and federal laws. Her personal compassion was constantly on full display when meeting with crime victims and their families. I stood beside her at crime scenes when she visited victims in hospital rooms, at family relocation centers, at conferences of victims of crimes, and many times one-on-one in her offices. She demonstrated her commitment to fairness and justice by not only rigorously seeking to hold perpetrators of crime responsible for their acts of violence, but she also demonstrated the same level of passion, care, and empathy for those innocent citizens who found themselves, through no fault of their own, a victim of some of the most horrific crimes committed by individuals against fellow human beings. Mr. Chairman, the United States of America and the American people will be well served by confirming Pamela J. Bondi as our next United States Attorney General. Thank you.
Distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify about the importance of the independence of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice when making investigative and prosecutorial decisions. Before my current position at Georgetown Law, I served for nearly 20 years as a federal prosecutor under Republican and Democratic administrations, and 3 years at Maine Justice, first as Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and later the Acting Assistant Attorney General for National Security. I stayed through the transition into the Trump administration before leaving in May of 2017. I do not know Pam Bondi. I am here today to speak because of my long career at the department, my reverence for the department and its mission, and its independence. The lawyers and law enforcement officials at the Department of Justice are critical to preventing the weaponization of the department and preserving impartial adherence to the rule of law. For the Attorney General, this means taking seriously their oath of office, which is to the Constitution, not the President. It means recusal if their impartiality regarding any particular investigation or case could reasonably be questioned. And it means reaffirming long-standing policies limiting contacts between the department and the White House on specific investigations and cases. The oath to the Constitution means that if there is inconsistency between what the President may ask the Attorney General to do and what the Constitution requires, the Attorney General must choose the latter. Although she is a member of the President's cabinet and therefore expected to implement the President's policy priorities, her duties are limited by the Constitution. That means, among many other things, not targeting people or associations for investigation or prosecution based on protected speech or association, not executing searches without a warrant, not denying the equal protection of the law to all people within the United States. It also means that any prior role as part of the President's legal defense team is over once the oath of office is taken. The Attorney General is not the President's personal attorney. She is the attorney for the United States. When President Ronald Reagan nominated William French Smith, his former personal attorney, to be the Attorney General, Smith was asked during his confirmation hearing how he proposed to ensure that his former relationship would not compromise his independence. Smith responded, "I would have to be very conscious of situations where it could appear that because of that relationship, a problem might be created." Smith recognized that legitimate concerns might require his recusal in certain cases to avoid the appearance of impropriety. As relevant to Ms. Bondi, her work defending President Trump during the first impeachment proceedings and public statements she has made about potential prosecutions of those involved in cases against President Trump could create, at the very least, the appearance of a lack of independence if she were to open investigations into people involved in those matters. Similarly, any involvement in any civil case against the DOJ, a civil case against the DOJ, about which President Trump's attorneys have given notice and which seeks more than $100 million for alleged rights violations rising out of the Mar-a-Lago search, could reasonably raise concerns about Ms. Bondi's impartiality that could only be addressed through recusal. In 1978, 4 years after President Nixon's resignation after Watergate, Attorney General Griffin Bell established the first of what has become known as the White House Contacts Policy. It has been reaffirmed by attorneys general under both Republican and Democratic presidents ever since. The DOJ policy recognizes the tension between protecting the department's independence in making decisions about criminal and civil law enforcement while also preserving the president's ability to perform his constitutional obligations to take care that the law be faithfully executed. The policy thus bars the department from advising the White House about pending or contemplated enforcement actions subject to limited exceptions while permitting communications about the advancement of the administration's policies. Just as in Bell's time, in order to insulate those who initiate and supervise law enforcement investigations, such as line prosecutors and their supervisors, communications with the White House about specific cases must involve only the Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General at the department and the counsel or deputy counsel to the President or Vice President at the White House. A parallel White House policy memorialized by counsels to the President over multiple administrations and directed to all White House staff contains similar restrictions on contacts with all departments and agencies. The incoming Attorney General would be well advised to continue to adhere to the White House contacts policy and to urge the White House counsel to do the same. In closing, public respect for the Department of Justice begins with public respect for the Attorney General. That respect comes from the impartial adherence to the rule of law, free from improper political influence. The Senate should ensure that the next Attorney General is committed to taking the steps to earn that respect.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you very much for allowing me to be here today. For a man from a small town in Florida whose father was a trucker and mom was a mail carrier, this is, being before the United States Senate, this is a true blue honor, so thank you for allowing me to be here. I know Pam Bondi. I've known her for about 35 years, and I've known her as a prosecutor. I've been her colleague, I've been her supervisor, she's been my supervisor, and I know her as the statewide prosecutor of Florida. And I hope to share with you a little bit today about what I know about Ms. Bondi professionally and what I know about her as a prosecutor and what I do know about her as how she will handle, as to how she will handle the job of United States Attorney General if you also decide. When it comes to criminal prosecution, Pam Bondi is unquestionably an ace. She did everything from batteries, DUIs, first-degree capital murder cases. She has experienced almost everything within the American justice system, from going to the scenes of these tragedies, to the courtrooms, to the witness rooms, holding hands with the victims of these crimes. Pam really has done it all. She appreciates the rules that make our criminal justice system the best in the world. And I wholeheartedly believe she will apply them and she will follow them. Ms. Bondi is a tenacious but a very thoughtful prosecutor. Crimes of violence upset her the most. She and I tried dozens of cases together before juries, including first-degree murders. Her level of preparation was simply outstanding. Her ability to connect with and speak to them on an understandable level was excellent. Juries loved her. Defense counsel respected her, and courts listened to her. It was clear that Ms. Bondi was there because she believed what she was doing. She believed in the case she was presenting. And she really did have that undefinable something that made everybody in the courtroom, juries, judges, maybe even defense lawyers sometimes, want her to succeed. She was excellent and still is. Ms. Bondi is tough. She quickly earned the title of career criminal prosecutor at a very young age due to her very clear feelings about repeat offenders and also her outstanding abilities in the courtroom. Her task was clear: prosecute the habitual offenders seeking out the highest sentence possible. And she did just that. She wouldn't budge in plea bargaining with these repeat offenders that had proven time and time again they weren't going to comply with our laws. And she always held them responsible for their offenses. Due to her tough on crime approach, she found herself in court trying cases before judges and juries routinely. And she loved to be in the courtroom. She loves being in trial. You know, the impact that prosecutors have on lives of people was never lost on Ms. Bondi. I sometimes find myself telling our prosecutors at the Office of Statewide Prosecution, please remember what we're doing here. Our jobs are great. We are so fortunate to have these jobs. But the amount of power that we wield and how this power will impact people is remarkable. Just the issuance of a simple subpoena can ruin a life, and that's an everyday thing for us. Pam Bondi understands that. She realizes it. As you've heard, she's done it for 18 years in the courtroom, and also the 8 more as the Attorney General. When she became the Attorney General, she didn't forget her experiences as a prosecutor. One of the things that she brought for me as Florida statewide prosecutor, which I'm very fortunate now to have continue under our current Attorney General in Florida, Ashley Moody. One of the things she did is she really shielded me from the politics. She understood how politics can impact what we do every day in a courtroom. And I will forever be grateful to both of them for shielding me from those politics. With all due respect, prosecutors, we don't usually want to be politicians. We just want to go in and do what we're supposed to do. And Pam Bondi made the job not only capable for me to complete, and I feel complete well, but she made it fun. She made it something I really enjoy doing. And I will be forever grateful to her and General Moody for allowing us to do that. You know, I said a lot more in my statement, and I'll let my statement stand. I know it's in the record and you all will hear it, and I've got about 12 seconds left. But I do want to say that on the question of independence, I've experienced times with Pam Bondi where I've said to her, it's a different role than what you all are talking about, but where I've said to Pam Bondi, General, no, we can't do that. She might disagree with me. She may let me know she disagrees with me. But in the end, she'd look at me and say, do what you've got to do. And that happened several times, a lot. She understands that. And I think she will be an excellent Attorney General. Chairman, if I might say to my colleagues at the Department of Justice, the prosecutors, as Mr. Ehrenberg said publicly, they have nothing to fear from Pam Bondi as a prosecutor. And to the contrary, I truly believe they will love working for her. Pam Bondi understands the rule of law. She understands the impact on lives. She understands what we do. And I believe wholeheartedly that all of them will love working for Pam Bondi like I have. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
I thank all of you for being very careful about not going over the 5 minutes. Thank you all very much for that. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Ehrenberg, and my staff gives me information that maybe you don't mind telling people that you vote for Democrats and that you voted against President Trump. I'm just saying that you probably don't mind us saying that, or you wouldn't have told us. You clearly have political differences with Ms. Bondi, and I'm sure you disagree with her on many issues. So what would you say to critics of Ms. Bondi who believe that she is, quote unquote, too partisan to serve as our nation's Attorney General?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those critics should talk to her political opponents in the past, like me, like Dan Gelber, who was the Democrat who beat me, who ran against her in the general election. Friends, it's rare these days that you see people who battle it out in a general election, remain friends after all these years. She had relationships across the aisle within the Florida legislature. I know because I was in the Florida legislature before I ran for Attorney General, and I saw it up close. I think some of the criticism comes in that she is loyal to President Trump, and she is. But I never believed that if asked to do something illegal, that she would knowingly do that. She would never step across the line. In my mind, I can't imagine her doing that. I echo what Nick Cox said, is that she's always been tethered to the law. She understands, as a 20-year prosecutor, that prosecutors have to follow the evidence and the law. And because of her background as someone who is not a super partisan, she had never run for office before running for Attorney General. She doesn't come from the world of politics. She comes from the world of prosecutors and in the criminal justice system, that I do believe that she will act in a way that is always tethered to the law and will not cross that line to making purely political decisions.
You worked with her on drug issues very much. Seeing how Ms. Bondi handled the opioid crisis in Florida, how do you think she will handle the crisis on a national level?
I think she's going to get tough on fentanyl across the border. I don't know the specifics on how she plans to tighten up on it, but I know she's going to make it a priority, because when we had an opioid epidemic in Florida and we were the drug supplier for the rest of the country, she went to a reluctant Republican-dominated legislature and told them we needed to pass this prescription drug monitoring program, something that had been stalled for a decade in Tallahassee, and she got it done. I had run on that platform. If I had been elected Attorney General as a Democrat, I don't think I could have persuaded that legislature to do it, but she had the credibility. It took Nixon to go to China. It took her to convince a recalcitrant Republican legislature to pass these needed reforms. So I don't know specifically what she will do, but I know that she will not shy away from standing up to people in her own party who will disagree with her on it.
Mr. Cox, you've worked with Ms. Bondi for 3 decades, and you're also a longest-serving statewide prosecutor. Some have suggested that Ms. Bondi's lobbying and political career will influence her decision-making. In your decades of working with her, have you ever known her to make a decision that was illegal or unethical?
Absolutely not. Ms. Bondi, as Mr. Ehrenberg referred to, and quite honestly, Ms. McCord could tell you as well, being a prosecutor is about focusing on the law and focusing on the evidence and focusing on really what's right. That's what our job is, to do justice. I know that she's embraced that, she's practiced that. I have never seen anything untoward in any of the cases I ever worked with Ms. Bondi.
And Sheriff Gainey, you served as Ms. Bondi's Director of Law Enforcement and Victim Services. You spoke in your opening statement about Ms. Bondi's work at federal, state, and local, with state and federal and local law enforcement. What would you say is Ms. Bondi's biggest achievement as Florida's Attorney General from the perspective of you as a law enforcement officer?
Senator, her willingness to partner with law enforcement is not uncommon for her to call together sheriffs and police chiefs, state law enforcement and federal, to seek from those leaders and directors what the issues are. Florida is a large state. Those issues are vast, and they change from one state to the other. She sits down with those partners, discusses those issues, and then fiercely do everything in her power to ensure that the men and women in our state and our federal offices in our state have the resources and the tools to do their job. Was not uncommon. We had, during legislative session, Sheriff's Association met in her office. The Florida Prosecutors Association met in her office. She provided space so it can be there to consult with her and her team and her staff on a regular basis as we address issues before our legislature every single year.
Senator Durban.
Sheriff Kennedy, let me follow up with you on that subject. You're aware of what happened here January 6th in the Capitol complex and the law enforcement personnel who were attacked by the mob, the demonstrators, and a number of them, hundreds of them, have been prosecuted, and some are serving sentences for violent felonies against our police. Was there anything like that in your background dealing with Ms. Bondi, where she's been called on to make a decision on standing up for law enforcement in similar circumstances?
Senator, every single day, quite frankly. She had worked with, we unfortunately experienced law enforcement officers killed in the state of Florida. She was there not only to work with those law enforcement agencies and those families, the respected prosecutors, whether it was our statewide or our local prosecutors or our federal prosecutors. She was a fierce supporter to make sure that the laws of the state of Florida was enforced, that men and women of law enforcement were supported, and that their families knew that she supported them on a regular basis.
Mr. Cox, you talked about several instances, experiences you had with Ms. Bondi when she was under political pressure. Could you tell us a little bit more about one of those?
Quite candidly, there was some pressure at the beginning when Mr. Ehrenberg mentioned about the, oh, I apologize.
You want to pull that microphone close to you?
That is the first time anyone's asked me to pull a microphone closer.
I may change my mind. Go ahead.
You wouldn't be the first. Many judges have. Ranking Member Durbin, yes, right from the beginning, when Mr. Ehrenberg mentioned about the problems we had with the opioid epidemic and the pill mills, she was actually, I will say this, was getting some pushback from our governor, Senator Rick Scott. And it was about the PDMP. And I was there when she sat down with Senator Scott. I believe Sheriff Gainey was there with us as well. And we had a couple sheriffs, and we were speaking with Ms. Bondi about it. She called the governor, now senator, I apologize, right then, and put him on the phone with us and had us discuss with him the need for the PDMP, the Prescription Drug Monitoring Database, and which ended up making a massive change. And to the senator's credit, he sat down and listened to us, asked us questions, and in the end, she convinced him we needed it. And as I recall, it was within the next week or two that he came up here and he announced his support for our PDMP. You know, she didn't have an agreement with a person who she loves. I mean, she very much got along very well with then Governor Scott. And she confronted him about it and changed his mind.
Now, here's a track record.
Yes, sir.
This newly elected president, as former president, fired 2 attorneys general under circumstances where they disagreed with him. Sessions, Senator Sessions in one instance and Bill Barr in another, and they were both fired. So it's pretty clear that he is not adverse to taking a different position than his attorney general and having a pretty short temper when it comes to dealing with it. That's the reality of what we see on the record, not once but twice. Can you understand our concern about whether she would react positively if he put that pressure on her?
I can understand your concern, yes, sir. But the Pam Bondi I know as a prosecutor, where her heart is as a prosecutor, and having my experience with her, myself telling her no when she was the Attorney General, I believe she will stand up to it. I truly believe that. She understands what our duty is. She understands, I think, the boundaries of the ethics, as she mentioned several times yesterday. She understands all of that. And she's a true prosecutor. Yes, sir, I believe she will do it.
Thank you. Ms. Gilbert, on this question of conflicts of interest and recusal, Ms. McCord, I invite you to answer this as well in the short time left. You seem to suggest that she can't recuse herself out of her current situation. Her background as a lobbyist and attorney representing private interest, that she might be able to find some response to it, but it can't overcome what you called systemic or whatever the characterization you used. Haven't we had attorneys general in the past with backgrounds in the private sector facing similar circumstances?
We have had lobbyists become attorney general in the past, but nowhere near the scope and scale of Ms. Bondi, with 30 clients of her own in just the last 5 years and coming from a firm that represents such a broad swath of corporate America. It would be very hard for her to remove herself from every situation that touches on these corporate interests. One easy example, I mentioned Geo Group. There's not a pending enforcement action or investigation into them. There is one into their top rival, the other biggest private prison company, Core Civic. She would not be expected to recuse herself from that. However, ramifications from it could impact Geo Group. And so it's just one small example of how interconnected corporate America is and how hard it will be for her to remove herself from all these situations.
I think my time is up. You next time.
Yeah, I'll be acting on behalf of the chair, and I am next in the order. Mr. Ehrenberg, you ran in a primary, got defeated by a Democrat, endorsed that Democrat in the general election against Pam Bondi, and Pam Bondi hired you? Thank you.
Correct, Senator.
Thank you. And actually, I can tell that you've still got a liberal leaning, because in the same sentence that you complimented Pam Bondi, you took a shot at the Republican-led legislature by calling them recalcitrant. So, I mean, folks, you need to pay attention to that. This is somebody who's been a foe, who probably spoke against her in a public setting, and she had the temperament and the good judgment to look past your political views and hire you into her organization. I think that says a lot about people. In fact, I've made friends with the guy that ran against me, and nobody on the Democrat side seems to like him anymore. So, Ms. Gilbert, this lobbying thing and I don't mean this in the time allowed. Can you talk about specific things that she lobbied for versus the firm that was retained? I don't know if Qatar hit the bingo card today. It may have for you. But then when Ms. Bondi explained that this was $115,000 a month for a firm that was handling human trafficking cases, is that bad? So I'm assuming not. So let's go to the next one. What specifically did she or the firm do for these yesterday? She focused it with Senator Booker on the abysmal state of the Bureau of Prisons. So she's clearly going to drill down on that. What in your due diligence, what specific acts did she, not her firm, did she engage in that makes you feel like her sincerity towards Senator Booker yesterday was not genuine?
I can't speak to her specific sincerity or motivations, but I can look
Speak
at
specifically to what she lobbied for that you expressed as a concern for the Bureau of Prisons, or for the private prisons, specifically what she lobbied for.
Absolutely. So from what we know about her engagements with GEO Group, as mentioned in my testimony, they have been condemned for not having a lot of...
I get it. There are problems with them, but I guess I'm trying to get to what specific issues do you think she carries into this office that would undermine her credibility in trying to do a better job with the Bureau of Prisons? I'm just trying to get to the fact. I'm not an attorney. I don't even play one here. But I'm just trying to figure out what specific acts did she do, other than around here, it'll be on the bingo card for Cash Patel, because we know where that's headed. But what specifically, for any of the high tech, any of them, what specifically did she advocate for, other than the by reference concern that we may have? That's all I want to know from your organization. What specifically have you found about Pam Bondi in a filing, in an argument, in a letter that she specifically said that you believe would undermine her credibility?
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, it is about the appearance of impropriety. It's
Okay,
actually
just
not
appearances,
about-
so you don't have a specific example.
It's about the engagement
Yeah, okay.
with this entity and the
Okay,
fact
so
that...
I get it. But in the same way that we know the facts about Qatar now, because we ask about it, it'll be interesting to see what specific role that she played. Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Ms. McCord, you worked in the Obama administration. Were you a career or political?
The entirety of my time at the Department of Justice, I was in a career position.
You were in a career position? Okay, thank you. Mr. Gainey, it sounds like I did the same thing, or I have done the same thing that I think Pam Bondi has done, just call somebody out of the blue and say, we got to take it a different direction. Isn't it also, she got a lot of blowback from the Republican legislature for some of the work that she was doing, to the point that Mr. Amberg made. Is that true?
That is true, Senator. In fact, it's the call that Mr. Cox referenced. It was on a Saturday morning, to be more
So I
specific.
bet if we went back at the time, like I sometimes get attacked, I bet if we went back at the times, we'd probably find several examples where people were taking shots at her from her side of the aisle for doing something that's proven to be very important. So she strikes me as somebody that was her power, that was her influence back in her time as prosecutor, and she stood up to him and did the right thing and didn't really care whether or not she got reelected. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you all. On behalf of the chair, Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to Senator Durban, and thank you to the witnesses before us today. I am going to start with you, Ms. McCord. Welcome back to the committee. If we could just go through these answers, because I think it's really important to put this outside of personal friendships, all these things, whether or not the Attorney General is a Democrat, Republican, who's in charge. And you testified that the Attorney General is not the President's personal attorney. In fact, the person is the attorney for the United States, the AG is. And you referenced Attorney General William French Smith's comments at his nomination hearing. Can you talk about the importance of maintaining this distinction that the AG is the attorney for the U.S. and not for the President?
So it's important not only to have the confidence of the career prosecutors and law enforcement officials, department, but also to the country, because the loyalty does need to be to the United States and to the Constitution. And there may be times, and I think Senator Durban pointed out times in the previous Trump administration where the Attorney General did not show sufficient loyalty to Donald Trump, and those attorneys lost their positions.
Okay. Thank you. And in your written testimony, you described the Justice Department's White House contacts policy that was established following the Watergate scandal. It's been reaffirmed by AGs under both Republican and Democratic presidents ever since. The policy states that all communications about particular cases from the White House or Congress must be referred to the AG or other high-level officials in the Justice Department in order to preserve the integrity and independence of DOJ investigations from political interference. Yesterday, I asked Ms. Bondi if she agreed with former Attorney General McCasey, Republican Attorney General, that any attempt, that was his words, any attempt by the White House, his words, to interfere with a case is not to be countenanced, and any call to align assistance or to a United States attorney from a political person relating to a case is to be cut and curtailed. She affirmed that she agreed with that statement. You also testified to a parallel White House policy, Ms. McCord. Can you speak to the importance of both the Justice Department and the White House maintaining and abiding by strict contacts policies?
Well, historically, like I said, post-Watergate, these policies have been instituted under Republican and Democratic administrations. In fact, Don McGahn, the White House counsel in the first Trump administration, reissued that White House contacts policy in January of the first term because he recognized the importance that it not just be a DOJ policy, that all within the White House staff know not to pressure the department or other departments and agencies when it comes to specific matters.
And how can Congress exercise its oversight authorities to ensure that the policies on both sides are being followed?
I think starting with the questions you asked yesterday, Senator Klobuchar, is a good start. And if it should come, if there should come any time where it seems like these policies are not being complied with, or if there is a refusal to adopt or continue those policies, those are something that Congress should be very concerned about.
Okay. Ms. Gilbert, you've been before us many times on the subject of antitrust. And as you know, and I know, and many Democrats and Republicans on this committee know, monopolies will go very far to preserve their power. Tech-funded groups, for instance, spent hundreds of millions of dollars against Senator Grassley in my bill, which was, of course, not just supported by consumer groups, but also by groups as conservative as the NFIB, the Small Business Association, because of the unfairness of monopoly tech companies putting their own products at the top of their search engines, and the unfair competition that results when they have that kind of power. You know, there are cases out there right now that are really important on monopolies: Google, Apple, Live Nation, Ticketmaster, RealPage, that are being litigated to their fullest. Why is it important that the new AG continue these cases to protect consumers, enhance competition, and just the general question about the rules of the road and how important this is as Senator Grassley and I reintroduce our bill?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question and for your and Senator Grassley's great work in this space. We are hopeful that the new Department of Justice will continue the cases that have been begun over the last 4 years. We've been really excited to see the strong forward momentum for dealing with corporate concentration, taking on monopolies head on. It's so important for consumers. Public Citizen is a consumer organization, and as we think about regular people and engaging with the markets, if they are squeezed out, if they can't sell their products, if there isn't fair competition, if small businesses can't get ahead, these are all problems for regular Americans. And so just really hopeful that the DOJ will continue what they've started, that these cases roll on, and then also want to put a plug in for your fantastic bill, yours and Senator Grassley's. We hope as the DOJ continues, so can the work here in the Senate on this important policy to stop self-preferencing, as you mentioned.
All right. Well, thank you. And I wanted to thank also others on the panel for their important work when it comes to pill mills and what it was and is going on with these horrible, horrible situations where people are getting hooked while people are profiting off of it. Thank you.
On behalf of the chair, Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard a lot about the newfound concern that my Democrat colleagues have about independence in the AG's office. Given over the last 4 years, it is ironic. Ms. McCord, I do want to ask you, you're talking about the importance of independence. Is it concerning to you that Eric Holder, while he was Attorney General, described himself as Obama's heat shield and his wingman? Is that concerning to you?
That's probably not the best description of the job of the Attorney General, but I think the record probably speaks for itself and speaks differently.
Okay. Loretta Lynch met with Bill Clinton just days before the FBI interviewed Hillary Clinton on the investigation as it relates to emails. Does that meeting with the spouse and former president of the subject of the investigation, is that concerning to you as it relates to the appearance of independence?
My understanding of that is a chance encounter at an airport on the tarmac, and that does not actually give me concern.
Okay. I don't think that's what happened, but that's an interesting characterization of that. But I think, and I'm going to switch to you now, Mr. Cox, because these are sort of related. I think the frustration a lot of Americans feel and why the decline in trust and faith in the Department of Justice is they saw exactly what happened over the last 4 years, which was a very obvious attempt to try to jail a political opponent. And I'm not going to ask you to comment on that.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm not going to ask you to comment on that, but I think that's why you see a lot of the questions that are asked by my Republican colleagues on this committee. It's just this lawfare. We don't want to see it continue. But what we've seen over the last 4 years is a total disgrace. And I think for the hardworking men and women in the Department of Justice who aren't engaged in this, it's affected the department's reputation, and why I'm such a big believer in Pam Bondi and what she can do and try to restore credibility to an agency that has been weaponized and politicized, and get it back to its core function, which is objectively administering justice and taking on violent crime. And I just want to ask you, in your experience with Pam Bondi, this has been what she's done. She's a career prosecutor, right? I mean, you can see her embracing this role of working with, whether it's the U.S. attorneys or other law enforcement around the country, of taking on violent crime, because we need leadership there. We've got a lot of, crime has gone up. And, I'm from a state that has, St. Louis and Kansas City, and we had partnerships when I was Attorney General with the U.S. Attorney's Office to take on violent crime. And when Joe Biden came into office, those were severed for political reasons, which is wrong. It's not a partisan issue. Do you see that as a role that she will play as Attorney General?
Absolutely, but what you just described about the relations with law enforcement is what not only she practiced, she encouraged all of us around her to do. And I could not agree more with you about your assessment of Ms. Bondi on that. Look, we're prosecutors. I mean, at her heart, Pam's a prosecutor. And our job is to go in and fight crime. But, we don't take lightly, those of us that are career prosecutors, that our job is to do justice. I mean, that's what the courts have said. And at her heart, 100%, that's Pam Bondi. It really is. So yes, and Pam loves law enforcement. I mean, let's not kid each other. We all love law enforcement and everybody and everything they stand for. And so, yes, sir, I believe she would do that with law enforcement and prosecutors. She did it in Florida.
And we'll talk offline about your role. It's an interesting role because in Missouri, the local prosecutors are the ones, there's no office of statewide prosecutors, so I'm not going to ask you about that. I just find that
Not common.
It's not a common thing. But in your experience in serving with Pam Bondi, did you find her committed to enforcing the law equally and impartially?
Oh, yes, sir, I did. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. And she embraced it. Yes, sir, she did. She is a complete prosecutor. She is a total prosecutor. And that's why when I speak to her independence, it's because she believes in it, and it's in her heart. I mean, seeing her recently, I know that's where she is. I really, truly meant it when I said to my colleagues at the U.S. Department of Justice, if confirmed, you're going to love working with Pam Bondi.
I couldn't agree with you more, which is why I was thrilled to be able to give that introduction yesterday of Pam. I think she's going to be an outstanding Attorney General. And I think she, like I said yesterday, I think she deserves a bipartisan vote, not only in this committee, but on the Senate floor. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Welch, you're next.
Thank you very much, and I think all the witnesses, I read your statements and watched, and I want to thank the Florida folks for being here on behalf of somebody that you know well and worked with a long time. She clearly is a competent person and has quite a resume, so you've reaffirmed that. A couple of questions that I have are less about her and her qualifications and more about this question that looms out there, where there's a mutual concern here about not using the justice system for political reasons. And there's a point of view with my Republican colleagues that it's been used that way in the prosecutions against Donald Trump. I don't agree with that, but I hear them on that. And there's a concern on my part, and I think a lot of our others, that Donald Trump has made very explicit statements that he intends to pursue political adversaries, and he's named them, including my colleague, Mr. Schiff, Liz Cheney. And he is now a president who enjoys the benefit of he will be a president who enjoys the benefit of the immunity decision by the Supreme Court. I strongly disagree with that decision. I don't think anybody is above the law. That's the whole basis upon which our country was founded. But I take him seriously when he says he wants a prosecutor to go after after his political adversaries. And the tradition in the Justice Department since Watergate has been to really create a near firewall between the administration, the executive, and the Justice Department because of its special role. And all of you are law enforcement, so you just know how awesome that power is that you have, and you have to have restraint as well as aggression. So how does an attorney general handle a president who has already put an immense amount of pressure on Bill Barr, one of his attorney general, who did it on Mr. Sessions? And shouldn't we take seriously the president's threat, President Trump's threat, that he's going to go after his political adversaries? And how do we deal with that? And how do we assess that in terms of this decision? I'll ask you, Ms. McCord, to start.
Thank you, Senator. As we know that in the first Trump administration, Attorney General Sessions made the decision to recuse himself from the Russia investigation because of his work with Donald Trump during the campaign and because of meetings he had had with the Russian ambassador during the campaign. He recognized that appearance of impropriety and the need for independence. He also appointed a special counsel to take over that investigation. Those are the kind of steps that are required when there could be pressure, and there was pressure put on Attorney General Sessions. Indeed, I think forever after that recusal decision, he fell out of favor with the president and ultimately was fired. But those are the things that an independent attorney general needs to take seriously and needs to do to demonstrate that commitment to independence from political influence.
And what's difficult here is that none of us know whoever is in that job and is confronted by a very determined President Trump to do something that from the prosecution point of view may not be appropriate. A political prosecution of an adversary for payback. There's no way to know how any of us, as committed as we are, would be able to withstand that pressure. But I'll talk to you, sir. You work with Pam Bondi, Pam Bondi, and have a high opinion of her. I'll give you the opportunity to say how she would be able to withstand what I think is inevitably going to be an enormous amount of pressure by the president at a certain point when he decides, directed towards whoever serves as his attorney general.
Let me start out by saying I've been fortunate enough not to be in that situation because I've had attorneys general that I work for, like Pam Bondi and Ashley Moody. However, a prosecutor's job is a solemn thing. The impact we have on lives is human power, and you're absolutely right. It's got to be respected, it's got to be appreciated, it's got to be embraced. And sometimes that means that I've been in positions before where I've thought, if I do or say this, I could lose my job. But you've got to be willing to do that. I don't know how else to say it. It's tough. It's very tough. My job, fortunately, is really not a political job because of my AGs. But you do have to be in the position sometimes when right is right to have to stand up and buck up.
All right, well, thank you very much. I yield back.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to each of the witnesses who are here today. Mr. Cox, let me start with you.
Yes, sir.
You worked with Attorney General Bondi for over 35 years.
Yes, sir.
Can you speak to her leadership style and how she managed the Attorney General's office?
Fair, of course, very kind, but firm. She was very decisive. That's what I liked about her. But in her decision, Ms. Bondi always listened. There were times she and I disagreed, several times, many times, where we would disagree, and she would hear me out. Sometimes I'd change her mind, believe it or not. So it wasn't often, but it happened. But sometimes, she would listen to me and go the way she felt. That was her job. She was the Attorney General. But she is very firm. She's very decisive. And I will tell you, the number of times I walked with her, she appreciates my role and our role as prosecutors. The number of times I would walk away from her and she wouldn't agree with my decision, maybe on a particular case, and she would tell me, do what you got to do. I mentioned it earlier in my statement. That's the Pam Bondi that I worked with. That's why I'm so confident in her that she can fill this role.
So I think the single most important responsibility that General Bondi will have at the Department of Justice is restoring integrity to the department. I think over the last 4 years, we have seen a pattern of politicization and weaponization of the Department of Justice that has done massive damage to that institution, a storied institution that is incredibly important for the rule of law. Speak to your assessment of General Bondi's integrity and her ability to restore integrity to DOJ.
Might I just answer that first off by saying she's a prosecutor, and that's what we're supposed to do. I've spoke to it several times, and I won't repeat myself, Senator. At her heart, she believes in the system. She believes in what we do. I don't think it gets more, with all due respect to everybody in this room and that may be listening, I don't know how much more serious it gets on impacting lives than being a prosecutor and being a judge who has to handle these cases. And she's always respected that. You know, I mentioned in my statement, she's never forgotten, she's never lost her humanity, and she hasn't. You know, might I say, I don't know if this is answering your question, Pam Bondi likes people, and she wants people to like her. And I don't know that that's so bad for an attorney general either, but she appreciates the impact of this job. I hope I've answered your question, Senator.
All right, Mr. Ehrenberg, let's turn to you. So you and I have known each other 30 years. We were classmates in law school. It's good to see you. Welcome, welcome to the swamp. You live in Palm Beach, which is a lot nicer weather than it is up here. And you spent 3 terms as the elected state attorney in Palm Beach County. You're a Democrat. You ran as a Democrat, were elected as a Democrat. And you also, in this last election, voted for Kamala Harris. Is that right?
Correct.
You've also worked closely with General Bondi.
Correct.
In your judgment, describe, same question I asked Mr. Cox, how would you describe her leadership style and how would you describe her integrity?
Well, Senator Cruz, in full disclosure, we weren't just classmates, you and I. We lived in the same dorm first year before either of us had any gray hair.
And burn those pictures.
Fair enough. Mr. Cox is right. She has a very hands-on style. Everyone in the office knows her. She was not isolated from the rest of us. She walked the the hallways. She was friends with everyone. She brought her dog to work sometimes, even though it probably violated code, and it was a big dog, the Saint Bernard. And she was just she's a very
It
likable
didn't have a
person.
barrel of whiskey under its neck, did it?
Only in Bugs Bunny cartoons. She's a very likable person, and I think you'll find that from everyone who knows her in Tallahassee and throughout Florida. It's hard not to like. You can disagree with her politically, and she and I have our political differences, but as far as a boss, she never tried to big time anyone. She's a person like everyone else. She expects the best from people, but she has a real human touch about her.
Now, you also worked with her very closely, in particular, in going after pill mills. Can you describe what you and she were able to accomplish together on that?
We were able to shut down the pill mills. Florida was the pill supplier for the rest of the country. 98 of the top 100 doctors who dispense pills were in Florida. It was a national embarrassment. The OxyContin Express was from Appalachia down to Florida. People would come down, buy their drugs, use, abuse, and then go home and sell them for a profit. We ended that. She appointed me to be the lead person, but we could not have done it without her. She was the person who got the legislature to change the laws. We couldn't have done any of that without that. She was the one who convinced them to pass the prescription drug monitoring program. That was indispensable. So it was her leadership that really led to a dramatic decrease in the number of deaths from opioid overdoses.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for testifying today. Professor McCord, I'd like to ask you about January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Can you succinctly define domestic terrorism?
Domestic terrorism under the United States Code is a crime, an act of violence that is a crime under federal or state law that is done with the attempt to influence a policy of government through intimidation or coercion.
Based on that definition, were some of the acts committed on January 6th acts of domestic terrorism?
Certainly the acts of violence that violate the criminal code do seem to have appeared for many of the people based on their own statements. Many of the defendants in cases that are being prosecuted, they seem to have been done to influence the policy of the government, and specifically to not certify the electoral college ballots on January 6th.
Yesterday, Ms. Bondi refused to disavow President Trump calling the insurrectionists hostages and patriots. What effect would President Trump's pardoning of these criminals have on our country? What is the message if that were to happen?
Senator, I believe it would have an enormous impact on the criminal legal system, and I would say also on our judiciary. In fact, I published a piece about that this morning in The Atlantic. We have our federal judges here appointed by Republicans, Democrats, and President Trump himself, who uniformly have condemned the crimes of those who have been convicted due to their attack on the U.S. Capitol. That anything close to a blanket pardon, which is what has been suggested but not promised by Donald Trump, without individual consideration of cases, would severely undermine these federal judges and undermine the criminal legal system.
We know, and this has come up with one of my colleagues, we know from the disastrous Supreme Court immunity decision that President Trump pretty much has a free pass to do what he wants. An unfettered president is even more dangerous if the Department of Justice is not independent. So based on your extensive experience at the DOJ, are there warning signs that we should watch for to signal that the DOJ has lost its independence?
Senator, I think as we've seen sometimes in the past, that when there are concerns among the career prosecutors and law enforcement officials at the department who have responsibility over investigations and cases, when they have felt pressured, many of them have actually resigned. We saw that during the first Trump administration with respect to some of the prosecutions involving Michael Flynn and Roger Stone.
So I take it that people resigning is one indication that all is not well, that independence is maybe not what's in practice. I'm just wondering, if we were to ask the Attorney General if the President ordered you or suggested or hinted that you go after his perceived political enemies, would the Attorney General be able to cite attorney-client privilege and not respond to us?
I don't want to give a legal opinion on that, Senator. I do think that that is the type of pressure that we are looking to an Attorney General to stand up to from the White House, and I certainly want to take Ms. Bondi at her word when she, under oath yesterday, said she would exercise independence.
Well, the thing is, what's deeply concerning about Ms. Bondi is that she is very loyal to President-elect Trump, and he demands 100% loyalty of all of his people. So yesterday, Ms. Bondi could not say that President Biden had won the election in 2020. That is a basic fact. And I think that it was her loyalty to President-elect Trump that basically made it hard for her, impossible, for her to say that President Biden had won the election. So that is concerning. Based on what we heard yesterday, I'm very concerned that if confirmed, Attorney General Bondi will say yes if and when President Trump asks her to do something illegal. And the thing is that not much of what President-elect Trump will do is going to be deemed illegal because of the Supreme Court's disastrous immunity decision. So I'm really struggling with how are we to know that all is not well in terms of the independence of the DOJ. One thing would be if they adopt a policy, or if the president adopts a policy that he will not order the DOJ around, even if this incoming president has said the Justice Department is basically his law firm. So if you have any further suggestions aside from people actually resigning to indicate that the kind of independence we are looking for is not being followed, I would welcome that.
Yes, and Senator
you,
Hirono,
Mr.
your
Chair.
time is up. Thank you.
Please respond.
Thank you. Let's see. Mr. Cox, I'd like to start with you. I heard your comments with regards to both Pam Bondi, who we are here for today, and you heap praise on Attorney General Moody, who you work for as well. I'd like to say a public congratulations to her being named Senate designee and be the next senator from Florida. Oh, look, I get to deliver the news to you. So DeSantis just came out and said she will be joining us. I am thrilled. I mean, as a mom of school-age kids, to have another woman sitting right here next to me, fighting for the people that we serve, with what I understand is her brilliant intellect, her ability and her passion for the people of Florida, which I know she will bring to the United States Senate. I cannot wait to call her a colleague. So on behalf of me and all of us, welcome to Attorney General Moody's new Senate designee. We look forward to her taking the ranks.
Might I respond or comment for just
Sure,
briefly?
absolutely.
Senators, you're going to love Ashley Moody. She is a wonderful person to work with. She's brilliant. That is, wow.
Wow,
Thank you
right?
for telling me.
I'm so excited I got to tell you.
Best thing about it is I can say I learned that in the United States
In the
Senate.
United States Senate, that's right. And hopefully she will be up here just in the next few days after we confirm Senator Rubio, who's going to do an exceptional job as Secretary of State. So congratulations to Ashley, and cannot wait to serve with her.
Thank you.
So now let's talk about another amazing woman, Pam Bondi. I have heard you over and over again when you respond to questions talking about her. I think you said she is fair, kind, and firm. You have talked about the fact that she is transparent and impartial. I would like for you one more time to say to the American people, based on your previous work with Pam Bondi, can you explain how she'll continue to operate, do you believe, in that manner, in a fair and transparent manner as she takes the helm of the Justice Department?
But because she believes in everything you just questioned me about, and she practiced it in Florida. You know, whether you agreed with her or not, Pam Bondi, like I said, is a person who really likes people. I think we should welcome that into government. I think that sometimes we lose sight of prosecutors. I'm going to speak to myself. We can lose sight of the fact of the ranking member mentioned, the immense power that we have, and we get caught up in it. Pam Bondi doesn't get caught up in those kinds of trappings.
I
She's
love
still-
it.
Yeah, she loves people, and she at her heart, again, is a prosecutor. As Mr. Ehrenberg had mentioned, nobody has anything to fear from Pam Bondi. She is going to be a breath of fresh air if y'all send her there.
Absolutely, and I think we need to restore those very things, fairness and transparency to the department, and I look forward to her taking the helm. She's going to do that for the American people, and it's an exciting new day, so thank you so very much.
And thank you for the news.
Absolutely, we are thrilled. So, Mr. Ehrenberg, I learned obviously that we need to talk with you offline about getting those the stories on cruise, right? And also that she has a Saint Bernard. I have a Newfoundland, so who knew that we both had love for the large dogs? And Sheriff Gainey, I know that you've had an opportunity to work with Pam Bondi as well. I want to talk to you specifically, both of you, about the opioid epidemic, about what we've seen with drug trafficking. I mentioned it yesterday. We heard Pam lean into this as well, but there is nowhere in my state that I travel where someone does not tell me a story about losing a loved one to opioid abuse, addiction, overdose. And so tell me from your experience and how she works with state and local law enforcement officers, state and local leaders. I am a big believer that local leaders know best. And you have people that come to DC that somehow get here and believe that we've become experts on every issue. And the truth is you have to talk to the boots on the ground to learn what to do, how to do it, and to affect real change. And so can you both speak to her relationships with state and local law enforcement and workforce and how you believe she'll carry that to the Department of Justice, please?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Britt. And thank you for the news about Attorney General Moody. I hope Nick Cox still has a job when he goes home. When I was her Attorney General Bondi's drug czar, we were visited by Gil Kurlikowski, who was President Obama's drug czar nationally. And it was a very productive meeting. I still have the pictures from that meeting. Not once was there ever a discussion that, well, he's from the feds, we shouldn't trust him, he's a Democrat, we shouldn't trust him, none of that. We were just trying to get the job done. And so she's seen it from both perspectives, as a state official working with the feds, and now being a federal official working with the locals. The person who can best talk about how she has a great relationship with local law enforcement is Emory Gainey, because he was the liaison. She had a special liaison within her office to make sure that she had a seamless relationship working with local officials. I saw it, but Mr. Gainey is the best to talk about it.
Yes, and Sheriff Gainey, if you don't mind leaning into that, I am out of time, but would love to hear your response.
Thank you, Senator. Unequivocally, that's one of the four leading rules of Pam Bondi. Work with our law enforcement leaders. Learn and understand the issues that each of those face. I mentioned earlier, we are a large state, as you well know. So there are diverse issues that the law enforcement from one end of our state, the others have to deal with. Pam listens to those. She encourages those. She asks for advice, want to know what's happening in the community, just the whole pill mill. And the bath salt issue was brought to her by a panhandle sheriff, quite frankly. What we've learned in law enforcement, we often see these things first. We start seeing these trends, and then we try to get them to our legislative leaders and our cabinet leaders to say, this is happening in our state. Sometimes they listen to us, other times they don't. Pam listened. She listened right away. She immediately sought out to understand what was causing that issue, and then sought legislation to get it done against some of our Republican legislators at the time who didn't want it. But her tenacity prevailed. She got it done. Our state is a safer state because of Pam Bondi.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Senator Schiff.
Thank you. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Greatly appreciate your testimony. Ms. McCord, you testified, thank you for all your good work over the years. You testified before the committee last September on the repercussions of Trump versus United States, the case on presidential immunity. You wrote, I think in your written testimony, there's nothing stopping a president from directing the investigation of his political enemies, journalists, or activists, even where there is no basis for doing so. As you will recall from the hearing yesterday, I asked Ms. Bondi a number of questions about what her intentions were, how she would respond if the president asked her to investigate someone, whether she thought there was a factual predicate for a case, for example, an investigation against Jack Smith or Liz Cheney. For the most part, she refused to answer any specific question. Didn't give me a lot of confidence in her willingness to push back against those kind of improper orders from the president. What should the Attorney General do? If a president is now, by virtue of this dangerous Supreme Court decision, immune from prosecution from violating the law and using the Department of Justice to do it, it doesn't mean the Attorney General should go along with it. What should the Attorney General do if the president says, I want you to investigate such and such political opponent?
Well, first of all, I would say the immunity decision right now, as far as we know, applies only to the president. And so there's no immunity for Attorney General Bondi if she were to engage in illegal activity or unconstitutional activity in carrying out a directive of Donald Trump. But I think before we even get to that, it would be important for her to make clear that she is not going to direct her department attorneys or the FBI to initiate unfounded investigations. If they're as departments of justice throughout all of my tenure there, always we followed the facts and the law and did not target any person for investigation based on political reasons. So it's really, that's why the independence is so much more important even now in the wake of that decision, because she is the first person to have a position of standing up to the president.
I also asked Ms. Bondi whether she would commit to preserving the evidence that was gathered as a part of the January 6th investigation by the department. She refused to commit to even preserving the evidence. Are there laws in place, or is it merely department policy not to destroy evidence? Should we have any confidence that that evidence will be preserved?
Well, there certainly are Federal Records Act obligations that require the records be maintained. And so I think that she would be well advised to consult with attorneys, career attorneys who specialize in the Department of Justice and be guided by their counsel. And it's certainly important in this case, as in these cases, as in every case prosecuted by the Department of Justice or investigated, to maintain records.
And if I could ask both you and Ms. Gilbert, recusal question.
Job for President Reagan, having been Reagan's personal attorney, that anything that would appear to be improper, that would show impartiality, she should recuse from. So, for example, investigations into anyone who was involved in the first impeachment proceedings or prosecution, because she defended Donald Trump in those proceedings. Even any investigations or prosecutions into those involved with the cases against Donald Trump, because she has made public statements about prosecutors and responding to that case.
Thank you. And I just would like to note that obviously yesterday she clarified that she'd never represented President Trump in a personal matter, but actually worked there directly with the White House. Also, it's interesting because we have seen this body confirm members who have lobbied for the Chinese Communist Party and confirm them to positions at ODNI, and it didn't seem that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle had an issue with that. And it's also interesting that we continue to hear General Sessions being brought up at these hearings over and over again. I do want to remind people, obviously, he is from the great state of Alabama, but
she didn't have an opportunity because the clock ran out?
You know, I think we are out of time, but I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you to our witnesses for testifying today. I know that some of you traveled long and hard to be here, and we are grateful that you did that. The record will stay open until 5 p.m. tonight, and so if you would like to add something to that, you are more than welcome to. And all written questions are due at that time as well. The hearing is adjourned.